All right, so welcome to the season finale of the Creating Belonging podcast. I've got a few guests from our past episodes. We've got our LinkedIn Live going, and I'm going to see if I can figure out where to see some Q&A. There we go. See, I've got people chatting. As you've got Q&A, would love to hear any questions that you all have, and we'll answer those, bring those into the conversation. But to get us started, right here next to me, I have the Creating Belonging model. I understand that we may have some people who are new to the work today joining us on this LinkedIn Live. And so I want to give a quick overview of the Creating Belonging model, just so people understand what are we talking about. A year ago, I published my first book titled Creating Belonging. And it describes how belonging is created at the intersection of authenticity and acceptance. We start with a Venn diagram and then move that out into a quadrant where we have authenticity on the vertical axis and acceptance on the horizontal axis. And that gives us 4 different areas within this Creating Belonging model that we might experience ourselves being in different communities or workplaces, the different places where we are. Down in the lower left-hand corner, we've got when we're low on authenticity, when we're low on acceptance, it's what we call that we're in recluse, where we are really not showing up with much of ourselves and not kind of engaging with the people in that community. Thing about recluse, it's not a bad place to be. It is absolutely okay to be in recluse if we need to be there for safety reasons. However, ideally, we have people moving into belonging. When we're high on authenticity, low on acceptance, it's what we call overbearing, where we aren't really appreciating or respecting others. And it's where I say privilege lives, where we've got some blinders on and our assumptions about what the rest of the world understands. If we go to the opposite end of the spectrum, when we're high on acceptance and low on authenticity, it's what I call minimizing. This is where we are muting aspects of ourselves to make other people comfortable with our presence. But if we've got the right balance of authenticity and acceptance, we get to move into belonging. Also understanding that we navigate around this model on a regular basis every day. And so you're not in one place all the time in the different communities you're in. We move around, but the ideal is that we're moving into a higher place of belonging. So I have with me today a few of our podcast guests to have a discussion about their experiences on the podcast and bringing some of that into this bigger conversation, and excited to be doing it live. I'm going to go in order of podcast episode release. First, I'm going to introduce Veronica Rivero. Veronica Rivero is here in Chicago, and I'm most excited, Veronica, for the restaurant that you're opening because I love queso. Veronica, do you want to just give a 30-second intro?
Hi, I'm Veronica. I'm from Lima, born and raised in Lima, Peru. Lived all over the U.S. from New York City to most recently Chicago. And I am part-time tech sales and part-time entrepreneur. I'm opening a Tex-Mex restaurant in the suburbs of Chicago later this fall. So follow us, chicagotexmex.com.
Yes, I'm excited for queso. We don't do queso well in Chicago.
Can't wait for you to try
it. Up next, we had our 6th episode, which was a 2-parter with Lauren Glazin. I love the title of this one, titled Blonde Identities, a play on blonde ambition. Lauren, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, both of them work. It doesn't matter. I'm Lauren. I am living in New York City, working in learning and development. I used to work with Justin, and originally from the UK, from London, but in America 10 years now, and happy to be here. Thank you for including me.
Thank you, Lauren. And then our most recent guest on the podcast, we actually dropped the second half of her episode this morning at 7 a.m. We have Dr. Britt Andreatta. Britt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Justin, and lovely to connect with everyone who's listening today. I am Britt. I create brain science-based solutions, and I write books on the brain science of success. I'm a geek. I love to geek out on all that kind of stuff, but I'm also in training and development, moving some of those best practices into corporations around the world. I grew up in Colorado and then moved all over the United States. I went to many different high schools and am currently in California.
Awesome. Thank you, Britt. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, I have your books behind me next to my
Yay.
book.
Thank you.
I want to dive right in. Since your episodes have been released, I'm curious kind of what conversations you've had with folks. Veronica, you have the most listeners on your podcast, so I'll bet you had some conversations since it was released. What are some of those things that have come up?
Yes, I think overall something that came up is just bringing your authentic self at work and how that varies on where you work, who you work with, and if you work for a corporate or nonprofit, along the lines of redefining professionalism, right? I think that when I graduated college over 15 years ago, my first job being professional, what does it mean? It's wearing a suit, getting my hair straightened up, proper makeup and skirt length. And now that has changed a little bit. Now that, the first half of my career was in corporate, second half more like tech or small startups. And that has evolved too. I feel more comfortable personally. Friends and people that listen to the episode talk to me about, hey, I'm in software sales. I've always wanted to dye my hair blue and I'm going to dye my hair blue. People don't care in tech because I'm doing fantastic work. Or I'm going to put my pride flag on my desk and represent myself. It's just being able to wear what you want, also follow your company's guidelines, at the same time, also being able to be your authentic self, help others do the same, inspire others to bring their authentic selves to work and redefine what being a professional means.
Yeah. The title of Veronica's episode was The Pink Blazer. We talked about wearing the pink blazer at work, which I love. Expression, authenticity, the way that we dress has come up in several conversations when it comes to gender identity. We spoke with Vanessa Sheridan about her journey as a trans individual and how clothing becomes a part of our identity. And we also talked about hair with Kendra. Not everyone has typical straight hair. Some people have different textures of hair, but professional standards aren't always cognizant of that. I'm curious, Lauren or Britt, if you have anything to add into that.
Well, I was going to say the Crown Act is really important because for so long, people of color have really been ostracized for hair texture and hairstyle. I can't think of anything more demeaning every day than knowing that how God made you is not acceptable, and having to spend a lot of time, energy, and money on that, and even face criticism and punishment for not adhering to those standards. So I think everyone needs to be paying attention to the Crown Act and what it does to even the playing field and try to undo some of that discrimination. I think we all need to be able to show up as we really are. Speaking as a white woman, I have so much privilege around that. I don't have to think about that. And yet so many people, it's a daily part of how they have to armor up to go into work and do their jobs.
Yeah. Britt, some listeners might not be familiar with the Crown Act. Do you have a 30-second synopsis of what that is?
It's legislation, so I don't have all the details on it, but it's basically legislation that says physical appearance and particularly hair can not be used to discriminate you. So it's trying to undo the discrimination around hair texture and hairstyle. I'm wondering, Veronica or Lauren, if you know more about it. I've been following it enough to know it's important, but I don't know the specific details. I know it's been moving through the legislation process.
Teaching me the last 5 minutes about it, so I appreciate that.
I'm not familiar with that either, so I'm glad you brought it up because it's definitely something to pay attention to. Well, speaking of hair, the blonde identity, curious your thoughts on this, on kind of the representation of appearance.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that I used to think about a lot. The company that we worked together in, Justin, was much more buttoned up. And then I transitioned to work in tech companies, and I felt so much more myself, being able to dress more androgynous or however I wanted to show up that day. Actually, where I grew up in England, everyone wears a school uniform. It's mandatory. There's no it's very American TV show for us to be kids are not wearing uniforms. And so everywhere in the UK, I mean most of Europe honestly, but I wore same in Peru. I wore a school uniform every single day of my life, now I talk to my wife about it, and we have like discussions about it all the time, about like where will our kids go to school and like things like that. And I'm like adamant, I don't want them to wear school uniforms because I feel like it sucked so much of my personality out of me. But then there's obviously the other side of the coin where, like how do kids dress and is it appropriate and things like that. But I'm a bit of a free spirit, so I like being able to sort of dress and wear my hair like, this is not particularly professional. I was in the office this morning and it's all good. So to answer your question, Justin, about what conversations we've been having, a few of my friends have been listening to the podcast and they're like, whoa, I didn't know that. And the conversations I've been having are more around people I've pushed to the podcast and learning more about me. It's interesting to see what people pick up on and the things that maybe I don't even bother to share because I think they're like mundane, but actually people find them interesting. So that's been cool to see how that unfolds.
I love the vulnerability that we've been having in the conversations because it's important to have that ability to share all the various aspects of our identity, and even the ones that the people we interact with on a regular basis may not know. It makes me think of a story. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking at a conference in Raleigh on creating belonging. One of the participants works in our realm of talent development and is used to having conversations around authenticity, being open and being vulnerable. And she said that she had this big aha moment when there was an individual she was in a classroom with. He said that he was a younger widow, like early 20s. And it made her realize she never talked about the fact that she was a widow because she didn't want to bring up a potentially negative subject or make others feel bad. She started to think about leaning into that and reclaiming that as an identity because it still is something that's a part of her. I'm curious if that story sparks anything for anyone.
I mean, for me, yeah. I mean, I think about so many of us have delved into the world of diversity and inclusion training and this idea of the iceberg, right? Like that there's certain parts of our identity that people can see about us, parts that we share. And then there's most of our identity is under the waterline, right? All these things that we've lived through, being a child of divorce, what your economic status, native language was. Do you have a mental or physical challenge that you live through or work with? Are you a survivor of something? I mean, there's so many pieces of our identity that we don't share or can't share or are too busy to share, or there's consequences for sharing, right? And I always think about, I remember my own journey around went off to college, totally privileged white kid, and learned a lot and had a lot of those blinders taken off. I remember someone saying, I said, oh, I don't know any gay people in my life. This was before I even identified as bisexual. So I didn't even identify myself as one. But I remember this person saying, no, you do. You actually have a lot of gay people in your life. You just haven't let them know that you're safe to be around yet. They don't know that you're safe to come out to yet. And that really shifted my perspective. If I'm going to understand the role that privilege has, it means that people will not be their authentic selves around me unless I am consistently giving signs that I have some awareness around this. It really shifted how I talked about things and how I used my language to create openings for other people to see a little bit more of who I am, and to create that sense of safety that maybe they could share more with me. Sure enough, once I did that, it was amazing how many people in my life were gay or who had experienced different things, or people of color who, seeing those markers in my language and behavior, felt more comfortable telling me the authentic truth of their lives and their experiences. So I think this whole journey is our own journey around our own identity, but it's also around seeing how and where we are safe enough to be vulnerable, because it's risky to be vulnerable if there's not some indicator of safety. People have died for sharing who they authentically are. And so I think that level of, like, we always need to be mindful of, that's the reality. People get hurt, people are killed around some of these topics.
I think it's also important to recognize that being able to not disclose parts of our identity is also privilege. Because there are others who have marginalized identities that they can't hide them. You know, if we think about race, disability, right? Like just someone's mere presence says something about them. Veronica, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think actually just to offer a little side of the coin for what Lauren said about the uniforms. I think that for me personally, growing up in a all girls Catholic school, extremely conservative. To your point, Britt, about like I didn't know any of my friends, they were gay or not, but I think the reason why I liked it was because we were all the same. Even if you are richer or poorer or middle class, we all wear the same uniform. I would love to see that when I'm interviewing for jobs. So the first thing people hear is my accent or like, oh, she's not going to be doing this or that. Instead of having that unconscious bias, I think that's a first step of starting from an equal playing field, but also in small pockets of groups, being able to create that open environment of belonging and telling some of my friends like, hey, I'm struggling with these things. Or like when one of my girlfriends came out saying that, I like girls, and I'm like, okay, that's great. I'm here for you. That doesn't affect how I feel about you or anything about our friendship. So what I'm new to this, because of where we grew up, but educate me, teach me, let's talk about it. And your secret's safe with me until you're ready. Kind of started from that same playing field, but taking it to the next level. I do like wearing my pink blazer and all that, but in certain situations, I feel like starting from the same playing field helps with that unconscious bias. And then you got to build those smaller pockets of groups where you can be vulnerable and help others also open up about themselves and how we can help each other.
Yeah, there's an interesting balance there of how do we level the playing field at the same time, how do we lean into our authenticity? And it makes me think of one of the biggest themes that came out of many of the discussions in the podcast was the concept of representation. Because I think that when the more we have representation of various identities, it does start to, I hate this word, but normalize those identities in a way that starts to level the playing field. And so I want to dive into that topic a little bit. And I'm curious if any of you have an example of how representation has helped you lean into your authenticity.
Well, I have ways where it's helped and ways where lack of it has hindered. I talk about this a lot, and actually, as I work in L&D on the side, I'm also becoming a marriage and family therapist. The work kind of intertwines there. It's so interesting to see behavioral science in that way and how many family systems work and then corporate systems work and all of the things that come with it. But for me, as I've been thinking about this, and I think about me and my wife, and if we start a family, what lesbians do I see that have a family and sort of the life that heteronormative standards aim towards? What I mean by that is this is a pretty heteronormative world. I can think of like Ellen DeGeneres maybe, or like Abby Wambach and Glennon Doyle, but I don't have thousands of examples of like people who are doing the thing that like we're trying to do. And there's not like years of, hundreds of years of different people, the world's been around for what, 10,000 years or something. And we're living in the last 8 years where gay marriage is legal. It's a really interesting time for us. It feels like, yeah, whatever, it's been legal, but it's literally been 8 years out of thousands of years. I find representation really important. And actually, I can't remember if I mentioned this, but Justin, you and I had a conversation. I was struggling to come out when you became my boss, and people at work did not know. And we had a conversation, and you looked at me and you were like, honey, I can never go back into the closet. Like I couldn't pretend even if my life depended on it. And I was like, I hope someday to get to that point where like, and I say that I rip off your line, Justin. I take it because I'm now at that point where I'm like, I am so gay. Like I want to have uncomfortable conversations, bring it on. And I'm not obnoxious about it anymore. I've reined that in a bit, Justin, in the last 4 years, but it's more so in a helpful way, like trying to represent the things that I know about so other people feel comfort. And that's all we can do, I think. So that was my soapbox.
I want to add to that. Being in work where I am always creating presentations for other people, I always think a lot about representation in things that we create. For example, I'm very intentional every time I give a keynote speech or in my books is that I am making sure that the photos that I choose are really representative. I'll go back and make sure, do I have people of different ages? Have I really represented different backgrounds and life experiences? I think it's really important. I just did a talk for a major global financial company a couple months ago. One of the members of the audience looked me up and emailed me and said, "Thank you so much for having a picture of a woman in a headscarf in your deck." She said, "It's the first time I felt myself represented." And she said, "For me, the headscarf is a very important symbol of my identity. I am very proud of it. I know people have judgment around it, but I loved the way that I could see myself in your presentation." And the fact that it moved her to the point where she looked me up and sent me an email afterwards just confirmed that we're all hungering to be seen, that there's representation. Now, the other thing that we have to caution against is it can't be fake representation, right? We can't have all these amazing photos on the company website and nobody actually looks like that in the company, right? It's a commitment to the reality of representing the real diversity of all this beautiful humanity, both in our workers and our customers and our executives. We've got a long way to go in the C-suite to have equal representation. But I think it really matters for all of us. And we also play a role in creating that for other people in whatever ways that we work or live in our neighborhoods.
Absolutely. I think something I like to add to that is that whenever I've hired people in the past when working for corporate or just even being the only Latina or woman in the group, because in tech, we also don't have many women or Latinas, I like to just start by pre-phrasing like, before you look at resumes, let's seek to understand, not to judge. I've done this experiment in the past where I just take out the names, right, in the resumes and just give them based on their experience. And so that they can add, we all have unconscious biases that we're all working on. So they can just, based on the experience, the different things, commonalities or work, so that have that playing field, kind of like wearing that uniform again. Talk to someone you've never talked to before, or try to expand your thinking and the way you approach your view of the world and your own job.
Thank you. One thing for our live listeners, I am paying attention to chat over here. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop those in. We'll bring that into the conversation. I wanted to summarize one thing that I heard, and this came from both Lauren and Britt, understanding the impact that you can have on others in representation that may seem inconsequential to you. Lauren, I remember sitting and having that conversation, but I don't remember that quote. And I love that you do. And, for Britt, what seems, while intentional, you had such an impact on someone. I think keeping in mind that we all have elements where we can infuse different types of representation into our interactions with people, keeping that front of mind to help them. I know that, and I do know, Lauren, that, back then I was absolutely like, my mission was, I'm out of the closet and I'm never going back in, because, as the story that I start a lot of things with, I once had a boss who said, you're too open with your sexuality, when I wasn't actually at all at the time. And so I never want to be in that situation again. And I know that being representation for others will do that. I want to transition a little bit to talk about the relationship between representation and authenticity. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about because this is a big theme that's come up, representation and authenticity, I think, create a virtuous cycle. And I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I absolutely agree. And I'm reminded of Dr. Brene Brown's work on vulnerability and courage. She talks about vulnerability as our greatest measure of courage, right? When we engage in vulnerability, it's a risk. We are opening ourselves up for potential judgment, potential discrimination, potential positive experiences, but we don't necessarily know how it's going to turn out. And yet it's such a courageous act. When I think about representation, I see a lot of courageous people who are willing to go first, even though super risky. I think about the Ellen story. Ellen came out publicly. It did not go well. Like, she lost her job, she lost her following, she received death threats. Like, she is an example of someone who really broke that barrier, and now I think is seen as the hero she always was. But at the same time, it was very damaging. A lot of people who saw what happened to her said, I'm going to stay in the closet a little bit longer. That didn't go well. And at the same time, her, along with many other brave souls who were taking the risk to come out, now create an environment where we have a lot more representation in media. I think media plays a significant role. TV producers and movie producers have some of the most powerful opportunities to show us reality and make people more comfortable. I think about how many men I see kissing in TV shows and movies, and that would have never been seen 10 years ago. And some people are going to be uncomfortable with it because it's the first time they've seen it. But after you see a few, you're like, oh, okay, a kiss is a kiss, whatever. And we can really desensitize people to some of their judgments or beliefs that they have through representation. So representation is super powerful both ways. We also overrepresent African Americans in media as criminals. And there's studies on this in terms of how they represent 90%, I'm making this statistic up, but it's a really high number around African actors, African American actors or Black actors, and how they are put in roles that have a criminal nature to them. That feeds the stereotype that people perceive when they consume that media. So we have to be super careful with representation because it can be helpful or it can be hurtful.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to be authentic without representing something. I don't even know if it's always front of mind for people. I'm just talking about everyday life, right? When I'm standing up there giving a training to people, saying things or listening in a certain way or asking certain questions, I'm being authentic. I feel like I'm representing different things, or people are using their own perspective to figure out what that means for them. Because it's personal, isn't it? Like, if I see you being authentic, Justin, that to me could represent like, well, you're an American and you're being that. But for you, you think, well, I'm coming across as a man, I'm representing men that they can listen or whatever. So I don't know. I think it's definitely an introspective understanding. Sometimes I think I'm being super authentic and someone's like, what, you were acting up then? And I'm like, was I? So I can get in my own head and go for days on the spiral, but yeah, hopefully I'm making some sense.
I think there's part of it. I go back to the story that I tell about an executive that I worked with that didn't like the idea of authenticity because he would say, if someone's an asshole, then that just gives them permission to be authentically an asshole. But I don't think that's what authenticity is. Authenticity should be much more intentional. We do show up as ourselves every day. Some parts good, some parts not so good. For me, the idea of authenticity is understanding who we want to show up as in the world and being a little more intentional with that. You know, there are probably things that I'm representing on a daily basis intentionally and unintentionally, and some that I may not want to show up as unintentionally. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think I want to marry the intentionality into authenticity.
I think it's a balance, which we're all trying to figure out. Like Lauren, you said, when I first moved to the US, I was 18 and I was trying to get rid of this accent because I'm such a perfectionist, right? So I'm like, why can't I speak perfect English? And I would meet people at college at Notre Dame, which I was part of the 1%, not 1% rich, 1% Hispanic. And they would be like, oh, I love your accent. And I would be like, oh, I hate it. And oh, okay. And then I realized so I shift my mindset on that and then made it my mission to help others that are also immigrants or international students to now when I meet someone that has an accent and goes through the same things that I go through, I help them reframe with hey, if I meet someone that has an accent, I automatically think that they speak another language or they're smart or they have world experience. I try to help them see it that way so that they're also proud of where they came from in their accent. But sometimes we can overdo it, right? I can go to just hey, Latinos, just Latino women. And guess what? We're still underrepresented in the C-suite, in tech. Not just Latinos, African Americans, LGBTQ, we're all underrepresented in the C-suites. So we still got to hold leadership accountable, find those allies that understand what we're going through, but also want to champion, not just us being surrounded by others that are just like us. We got to help each other, elevate each other, and find that balance of being our authentic self, but also help others that are not like us understand why it's important to bring that representation.
Yeah. Veronica, you make me think of another concept that came up because you had mentioned, and I think you talked about this in your original episode too, when you moved to the States, you were really trying to diminish your accent. Over time, you grew into your own acceptance and comfort with it, realizing it is a part of you that you don't want to be ashamed of. That leads me into thinking about some of the conversations I've had around society's expectations of us and how we try to fit into those expectations. And essentially what we're talking about is minimizing, right? So how are we kind of pulling in our own authenticity to be what other people want or what we're told other people want? What thoughts do y'all have on that?
You and I spent a good chunk of our podcast talking about my journey as being a girl and then a woman, and being socialized really early on that my body would be sexualized, whether I wanted it to be or not. And all the message I received around needing to dress to attract a man, and at the same time, be careful and always check the back seat of your car. It's always this double-edged sword of the goal is to be sexual and attract someone, but don't do it too much or else you're going to get a bunch of bad stuff happen to you. It's a very confusing journey around that. So I think that, who you're supposed to be to whom and when can sometimes be a moving target. And the very thing that is complimented is turned around and used to attack. And I just have that experience around gender. I know that racial identity and sexual orientation and all these other aspects of identity are even doubly confusing. So I'm struck by, we all grow up being told by people around us how we should be and what the pros and cons are of that. And then we have our lived experiences, and then we've got media. It's very confusing. And it's hard to unlearn that stuff. I shared with Justin that I find myself thinking in my head things that my mom said to me. I have a daughter now, and I find myself wanting to pass on those messages. And then I'm like, wait, no, that's not a message I want to pass on. But it's amazing how quickly that voice is in my head. Men won't like that. Don't do that. Men will be threatened by it. It's scary, the level of brainwashing you have to intentionally be aware of so that you don't pass it on unconsciously.
You make me think of a TikTok I just saw yesterday that was of, this mock thing of mothers in the 70s having a meeting and talking about all the lies they can tell their children to scare them. That very much shaped us as Gen X and millennials. Lauren, I'm going to pick on you because I know I can. When it comes to societal expectations, I know one of the things that we talked about, and it was almost this trite statement that I said, was how you came to the States to find your freedom. In that, I assume there are some societal expectations that you may have been escaping. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, on your societal expectations, and then how that your identities.
I think societal expectations cross borders, maybe trying to escape from it in some ways from England, and being in a tight-knit Jewish community where things are expected of you at a certain age. Anything other than that is deemed like not successful, pretty much. And still, I find myself having these conversations with my parents or other parents where success is being married to someone of the opposite sex, or maybe of the same sex now. Like maybe that's like entered the conversation, like some kids, like a good job, owning a house. I'm just like, I don't know if that's how I define success at this point. It can be pretty lonely because when your whole family or your whole community thinks that's what success is, you can feel kind of crazy thinking, well, maybe I don't want to be in a marriage with just two people, or maybe I never want to own a house, or maybe I want to move every 5 years or something. It's like anything outside of what's deemed societally successful can be pretty isolating. So I wonder how much society pushes us on the journey, like a lazy river. It just makes us do the things that everyone else does. I think the therapy school and the L&D stuff and just having to face my own demons and battles and coming out and things like that, they make you think, what do you really want? And I don't know. Does anyone know? Does anyone have the answers? No.
Yeah.
And you brought up a good point on, everyone has their own definition of success, right? And I think we all grew up with, for me too, oh, Latina, you're going to be a housewife and get married by 25 and all that. I was like, 25? I don't even know what I want to do with my life at that age. I was living in New York City at the time. And I think this is why I love big cities too, because they're a little bit more open, not where we all would love them to be, but also I saw people that look like me. I saw representation in my food and certain C-level executive and people from all backgrounds, and I learned so much. So I did love that. I don't want a house. Some people want the white picket fence, others want the white picket penthouse. It's what you want. It's different, and some people want kids, so they don't. I mean, there's always going to be, unfortunately, people that will judge us if we don't fit within their mold, but just coming up front and saying, this is my definition of success. It might not be yours, but I'm really happy who I am, what I'm doing, and hopefully you can be happy for me and for others that have chosen this path as well.
Thank you. Well, so I'm just looking at the time, and I know this is eventually going to turn into a podcast that people are going to listen to, and we'll probably just release this whole chunk as one. So I want to wrap up the conversation. I don't see any questions coming in the chat online. And so I want to thank everyone for your participation in the Creating Belonging podcast this season. It was very much an experiment in, can I launch a podcast? I did. Today was an experiment in, can I do a LinkedIn Live? The answer is yes. Thank you all, but I want to just see if anyone has any closing thoughts or words they want to share.
No, I'm proud of you. I think this was awesome. And what a great experiment. And it was successful in my eyes.
Thank you, Lauren.
I really value the model you created. It's such a depth and richness that allows these conversations to come forward in a non-threatening, exploratory way. I think everybody can find themselves on the model and see that they've been in all four quadrants at various times around different parts of their identity. If folks haven't read the book yet, I encourage you to pick it up. It's a great way to open up some of these conversations with people at work and in your family, and explore how each of us, how we feel like we are authentic in our lives and where we may be missing some of that. I think it's a great thing for us all to explore.
Yes,
Thank you.
Justin. Thank you, first of all, for creating a safe space for us to be ourselves, to share our stories, but also for creating your model. I mentioned in my episode that as someone that's a DI keynote speaker and has been through so many trainings and taught trainings and even sold some DI programs as well in tech, I just thought it was great, very simple, but also a great, easy way for anyone to identify their own unconscious bias and go beyond the things that we hear over and over, right? So thank you for creating that, and also for opening up this forum. I think it is great. And hopefully for those out there listening to us, they can identify with our stories or reach out to us, and we can help them come and bring their authentic self, whatever it is, at work and the nonprofit, being entrepreneurs or whatever it is, so speak up, like Lauren said, because that's something that I feel like for me, it's not always gone well, but I try to speak up whenever I can and lead the way for others out there. So thank you for creating this great space.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you all for your endorsements. I swear that every time I record something, I'm like, this isn't just self-flattery inducing people to say nice things about me and my work, but I really appreciate it. Thank you all for your participation, and stay tuned. Season 2.
Yeah.
We'll see when it comes out. Thank you all.